we have with us today, we're honored to have two extreme pilots from very different extremes. We have André Borschberg, who flies jets, so Hawker Hunters, F-5s, at one end of the envelope. And we have Bertrand Piccard, world record-setting balloonist, first to circumnavigate the globe in a balloon. And together they've collaborated on a remarkable project that lives in yet another corner of the aeronautical envelope. And we're honored to have them here in conversation to tell us a bit about it. But first, I think we're going to roll an introductory film.
Yes.
The first airplane to fly. The first to cross the Atlantic. The first to break the sound barrier. The first to fly day and night without fuel.
3, 2, 1, go! We made it, guys!
We made it! Absolutely unbelievable.
It's designed to slowly ascend throughout the day, charging its batteries.
When I was a child, I saw my father diving to the deepest point in the ocean with the US Navy. That was actually my first inspiration. And today, with scientific exploration, I want to inspire others to also achieve the impossible, thanks to pioneering spirit.
I've been educated at MIT, and this time spent in Boston led me to found startup companies. I know that dreams fuel innovation, and I also know that human commitment and new technologies can really change the world.
In a spirit of exploration, Solar Impulse intends to achieve the first ever round-the-world flight powered by solar energy.
It's amazing, just amazing.
Inspiring new generations, bringing innovative solutions to the challenges of humanity, inventing a brighter future. Would you like to be a part of it?
So to be clear, this project of yours, this collaboration, has some implicit and some explicit goals. Can we start out by telling us what the explicit goals are? What exactly, in FAI terms, is it that you're attempting to do first this year and then in 2015?
You think the objective goals?
Exactly, yes. Our goal, as you have seen, is to fly around the world with a solar-powered airplane. To do that, we need to fly day and night. Up to now, in fact, solar-powered airplane has been flying since about 30 years. But they fly well when the sun is high in the sky, so between 10 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but no one can fly through the day, and of course no one can fly through the night as well. To cross ocean, of course we need to get to this notion of perpetual flight. And we wanted to have a clean solution, the solutions where you collect the energy directly on the airplane. And you will understand why afterwards. So what we did now was able to demonstrate we can fly day and night. We limit ourselves to fly to 24 hours. The next goal is 2015. That's our flight around the world.
And meanwhile, if we're here, it's to cross the United States. Because it was, until now, a European project, Swiss project. Of course, the next level is to bring this airplane where everything began. The history of aviation started here in the US, so for us it's great to bring the project to the higher level, which is coast-to-coast America. But of course the goal, as you can see, is to fly day and night with a solar-powered airplane. That means without fuel. But beyond this, what we like to do is to inspire people to also try to achieve the impossible. Because maybe for you it's very strange what I'm going to say. But you know, for the rest of the world, which is not Google, a lot of people are limited by their fears. They are limited by their certitudes. They are limited by their convictions that they cannot do better than what they already do. And that's why humankind is stuck and doesn't move as fast as it should. So we want to bring positive emotions around innovation, around exploration, around clean technologies, and show that the challenges we're facing now in terms of ecology, environment, clean technologies, energy, and so on, is really something sexy that people should look with bright eyes and not with reluctancy.
Wow, so all of that in one airplane. Well, 2 airplanes, I guess.
Yeah. But you know, if we woke up in the morning and with André and say, oh, we should speak about innovation, we should speak about pioneering spirit, nobody would come to listen.
Right.
But because we have an airplane that is really fantastic, and the one of you who are pilots can imagine how it is to fly an airplane like that, and this signature in the sky, such a crazy shape. Of course, people are attracted by it, the media talk about it, and it gives us an opportunity to really explain what we deeply think. So it's an airplane, we love to fly with it, of course, but it's also a vehicle to spread what we really believe.
That actually almost sounds like a counterpoint to somebody with a keyboard in front of them can look up the Saint-Exupéry quotation about if you want men to build ships, don't tell them about the engineering, but take them down to the shore and talk of the sea. This is sort of the opposite. You're building a ship so as to instead of the sea, teach people the wonders of flight, limit the technology, what you can do with unlocking. I'd love it if somebody could like look up the exact quotation now that I've butchered it. But
for, you know, flying is a dream also. So you don't talk only about technology, you talk to the emotions.
Yes.
And I think everyone, you know, sees an airplane, can imagine himself being there, maybe flying himself. So it's really linked to this part of the brain as well.
And you know, in my entire life, I was reading history books about exploration. And I saw the power of exploration in the mindset of the people. And today, with this solar airplane, we can write a page of history instead of only reading what others have done. And this is what is fascinating. And this is also why we want to associate as many people as possible to this adventure. So the maximum number of people can really feel they're part of this history of aviation and energy and innovation. That's why it's nice to make a talk here, then to invite you to see the plane and have you really understand what we do and spread the word further on. So it's also a communication project, not only an aeronautical project. Sorry for the pilots.
I was going to ask this later in the discussion, but since you talked about you want as many people as possible involved, what are the different ways you're getting people involved? There are clearly the passive ways of coming, watching, reading, following online. Are there more active ways you're getting people involved?
I mean, flying is certainly is the best way. It's where we get most of the people following up on the project, and we have quite a lot of interactions. The pilot is connected from the takeoff to the landing with the ground, not only with the ATC, but with the control center, and through the control center with media, partners, universities, schools. We had a lot of discussions, and of course the public, but we have a lot of discussions with the schools and kids of the age of 10, 12, 14, asking questions. And when you can answer these questions at 30,000 feet, or almost at 30,000 feet in a solar-powered airplane, and you can talk about this technology, I mean, this is an impact.
And we've noticed also how many people dream about innovation, dream about being pioneers in their own life, dream about being more open to the world, but they don't dare to do it. They're alone, they're isolated. And we also like to bring these people around Solar Impulse to create more connections between them. In other words, to give a little bit more of voice and power to the people who have something to say and to do and who don't dare to do it. So we're starting now, it's the early beginning, but you know how an early beginning can grow, where we're starting to build a community of people who like to share this mindset and who like to interact together. So it must be a two-way communication with this community. So we're starting it now, and it should be completely ready for the flight around the world. You can already start to sign up on our webpage for that.
On the surface, as I alluded at the beginning, to balloon pioneer, jet pilot, you're flying a very different kind of airplane here together. How did this? Can you tell us a bit about how the collaboration started?
I think it's interesting to talk about our collaboration because that's, I think, also linked afterwards to this question of flying the airplane. We are very different. I think we share the same goal, we have the same goal, we share the same values, but we're extremely different. Bertrand is a psychiatrist, a medical doctor. Maybe has more the dimension of the humanist, and I'm an engineer, and maybe more the technology. Although, as we see, we influence each other so much that he's becoming an engineer and I'm becoming a psychiatrist as well. But the combination, in fact, of this totally different approach help us to maybe find other solutions or different solutions. So when we are in disagreement, for example, these are situations we like because we know from this disagreement will come something which is better than my idea and maybe better than his idea. And I think in terms of flying, that's the same. I mean, Bertrand comes from the low-speed airplane, but the airplane also where you have to discover the flying qualities, the envelope. I'm coming maybe from the fast airplane, but where I think we have more knowledge about the behavior of this airplane, and we are somewhere in the middle with the solar impulse. So everyone is bringing something different, but which helps at the end to achieve, I hope, our goal.
It sounds sort of like a Lennon and McCartney or a Brin and Page type collaboration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know how it is. It's 1 on 1 equals 3. That's the best equation. It's André, me, and both of us. The only one who is really able to run that project is both of us.
Let's talk about the airplane. So it's insanely large, it's insanely light, it's powered by photons coming from how many million miles away? I'm embarrassed, I don't remember how far the sun is. Tell us a bit about the structures. I understand you had to, that actually putting this thing together, you had to push a bit beyond the envelope in various materials, technology, power engineering, aerodynamics. Tell us about the plane.
But maybe to understand the technical questions, it's interesting to see where we are coming from. When we started the feasibility study, one of the first questions we looked at was the question of energy. That's, I think, the case for any airplane, but it's really the case in this one. And how much we could collect, and of course, how much we need, and try to balance both. And it was very clear from the beginning that we had to save energy. In fact, the project is really about energy savings. And that's what's attracted our partners. I mean, if you see the partners we have about 80 companies, large, small ones. There's one coming from the aviation field, and the 79 other do not come from the aeronautical industry, chemical, electronics, whatever. And the interest of these people was to develop technologies that can be used not only in aviation, but everywhere. And so energy savings is the key questions. So the consequence was quite straightforward. First, the airplane has to be big and a large and big wingspan to get more lift and reduce as much as we could the drag. When you know the size, you can see and calculate how much energy you can collect. That's given by the sun, you can't change it. That's given by the solar cells technologies. You can improve a little bit, but developing a new technologies, as you certainly know, takes 10 years or more and a lot of 100 millions. And when you have this, you can calculate how much the airplane should weigh. And in our situation, conclusion was it should be the wingspan of a 747. The power we have available over 24 hours is, in average, the power of a scooter, and the weight would not exceed the weight of a car. So that was that's the starting point, and the rest follows.
So the goal was clear, and we were thinking in the beginning that airplane manufacturers would fight against each other to be able to subcontract our airplane, to design it and to build it. And they all said it was impossible. So we had to find people who did not know it was impossible, put them together. That was Audrey's job. He brought the technical team together. And then the subcontract of building the carbon fiber pieces was made in a shipyard. So it's a shipyard who has built the most crazy airplane existing today.
But not any shipyard, huh?
Yes. No, it's the one who built the hulls of the Alinghi boats for the America's Cup. So of course today everybody speaks of Oracle, but Alinghi with the same shipyard won the America's Cup twice.
Twice, yeah.
Just to give you a little bit
2003
the quality of the construction.
Can you tell us a bit about some of the individual pieces of the technology? You know, what sort of innovations you needed in, you know, is it just a straight carbon fiber layup, you know, ribs, or?
Well, first maybe before André goes into the details, there was no benchmark.
Yeah.
Absolutely no benchmark. So that was interesting because we could really create something. We were not limited by any knowledge. Very often we're limited by some knowledge and we try to extrapolate, to optimize. Here everything had to be created from scratch. And that was also great for our engineers because they had the impression really to invent and to create. It was limitless in the beginning. Of course, then it narrowed a little bit because we had to make a design freeze.
So we started by building up a simulator, not a flying simulator, but a tool which simulates 24 hours flight of such an airplane. So how much you collect, how much you use, the aerodynamics of it, all the flying characteristics, and then to be able to compare different solutions in terms of size, in terms of layout, in terms of shape, in terms of dimensions. And if you look at this airplane, finally we ended up with something which is quite conventional. I get very often the question, in terms of shape, very often the question, I mean, why did you do something completely crazy and, you know, with the circular wings or whatever? And I think the number of unknown was so big that we said, okay, the best way to achieve our goal is still to use what we know, and a conventional aircraft is something we know very well, to be able to integrate a completely new structure, completely lower wing loading, and of course a completely new propulsion. So that was the way we approached that. And then we had a weight which we had to divide, the weight budget which we had to divide in different components. But some of them are given. And of course we worked on batteries, we improved the batteries with the manufacturers. We try to improve the solar cells, but it's very quickly, it's a given. I mean, you can't change much over a period of 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Okay. So the materials, that's where maybe you have the most flexibility, and that's where we put a lot of efforts.
Did you find yourself at any point when doing these simulations, doing these equations, coming to basically a roadblock where you said, okay, and with this, the propellers have to weigh -5 pounds apiece? Did you find yourself at any of these places where, you know, some numbers didn't work and you had to back up and change?
Yes, that brings us back 5 years ago when I saw André starting to make a diet. Stopping to eat, you know, for 2 years in the beginning when he was really involved in the calculation of the weight, he wasn't eating anything and he was getting skinnier and skinnier.
Yes, yeah, the ideal pilot is sitting up
so
here in the front
I got
row.
my minimum weight there.
Yeah, okay. Right. Yeah, I have to say I was a little surprised in terms of, you know, trying to minimize weight, maximize aerodynamic efficiency, that you did end up with what looks like a fairly conventional planform, as opposed to some of the early human-powered flights, which was a canard, where, you know, with a conventional aircraft, your tailplane is actually creating a downforce, decreasing your efficiency.
But you know, for us, the main word to fight was drag.
Sure.
And this airplane has the lowest drag that was possible to obtain. So of course, if you put a double-decker, you create twice as much drag. Of course, you also create shadow for the solar cells on the bottom, so on the lower wing, so it's useless. But all these type of things, also inflating a helium balloon on top of it to increase the lift. Okay, you have more lift, but you have so much drag that in the end, you get all your batteries empty before the end of the night just to try to move 8 knots forward. So it's useless. So at the end, what the engineers came out with was this shape that gives the best sink rate ever of a flying machine. It's less than a foot per second sink rate. The best competition gliders have a little more than 1.5 feet per second. So this is energy saving. This airplane needs so little energy to stay airborne, and that's how we can make it through the night.
But just to answer your question, I mean, your point before, what we try to get is almost zero lift on the tail, because of course if you have lift, you have drag. So that's reasons why I didn't opt it for canard solutions or double deck or whatever. That you try to have one long wing and only one induced drag, and that was also the design criteria there.
Okay. So what's it like to fly?
You wanted to ask that question since the beginning, huh?
Oh yeah.
But all the way through the airplane before I tried it, so you have to answer that.
I would look at it in two different ways. I mean, the first one is the question of energy. You know, if you can fly, you can take off almost empty battery in the morning. You could climb to 28,000 feet, and you can fill up the batteries totally. And if you land at sunset, this is energy you can provide to the grid. So you have the benefit of flying 12 hours and producing energy at the same time. So that's a strange feeling, and that's really unusual for me. But in terms of flying, that's an airplane which has two personalities. When the air is extremely calm, that's an airplane that you can fly with two fingers. It's extremely smooth. It's extremely easy to handle if you understand how it reacts. That's a question maybe after, and Bertrand certainly talk about that. But when it starts to be turbulent, you need a lot of effect of the flight controls, and of course, as they are not assisted, you also need a lot of effort. So when it's turbulent, it's a big fight. It's a heavy workload airplane in this situation. So you really have these two personalities.
And to really explain how you feel as a pilot inside, I think the best example is the helicopter. You know, in a helicopter, you are just suspended by one point, and it's completely unstable in 3 axes around that point. In an airplane, it's not like this. In a normal airplane, you have axes, and you can be stable around the bank, stable around the pitch, stable around the yaw, and you can combine one after the other. In this airplane, you have to combine all 3 together, even much more than in a glider. And sometimes you have the full deflection of the stick on one side and the full deflection of the rudder on the other side, in order to keep the red thread in the middle and get out of a turbulence. So it needs a lot of dissociation of the pilot. It's in that sense, it's quite strange. And you better be careful, because there's a permanent telemetry with the control center, and each time you don't react exactly the right way, you have the engineer screaming in your helmet, "Hey, what are you doing? Hey, watch your speed, watch your bank." And they have everything, and you say, "Yes, I reacted full deflection." And they say, no, we saw on the computer it was only three quarters of full deflection, so next time you have to be more effective, and so on. So you can hide nothing, you can hide no mistake. And it's sometimes, when I was starting in the beginning with flying this airplane, I tell you, it was not so fun.
You get to monitor the engineer's heart rate as well when you say, "Hey, watch this."
That's a very good idea. I think we'll suggest that. Transfer the cockpit instrument down to the MCC. But talking about the beginning, we started with a flight simulator. And of course, we wanted to see we wanted to compare design solutions, and of course, we wanted to see how this airplane flies. And interestingly, I mean, flying was, as usual, not so much a problem. The difficulty was landing. And no one could land this airplane. I mean, the airplane was either on the left side in the grass or on the right side in the grass, but not over the center line or not close to the center line. And we had a lot of
sideways or upside down.
Yeah. And we had a lot of people also. We have a test pilot. We also had as advisor a former chief test pilot of NASA who had the same problem as well. I mean, he couldn't sleep anymore even. But until we understood that the airplane had very slow reaction, and that you had to anticipate what he was going to do as soon as you make a change in the flight controls. And at the beginning, of course, we were always overcorrecting and getting this airplane in oscillation. It's quite known for certain aircraft, and we call it pilot-induced oscillation, but it was extreme in this one. But slowly we got used to it, and then the quality of the landing improved, and we were ready for the first flight.
You know, when we explain all this, I don't want you to have the impression that we made the most difficult airplane to fly, the most difficult airplane to build, the most difficult airplane to operate. Huh? That was not our goal. But it's the price we had to pay in order to have an airplane that could fly day and night with absolutely no fuel. Maybe in the future we can have smaller wingspans, we can have heavier wing load and things like that, and it's going to be easier to handle, I hope. But for now, it's the price we have to pay. If we want to have a stable airplane, we have to put the gasoline, have a short wingspan, heavy wing loading, and limited to 2 hours.
Right. Actually, speaking of endurance, if I read correctly, some of your mission profile talks about in the round the world flight, flying to, is it the pilot's physiological endurance limit? I think that was the term. So, not entirely stable, requires constant attention, no autopilot. How? Where are the limits there? Is it staying awake? Is it bathroom breaks? Is it?
Well, if you're passionate enough, and if like us, you wait since 10 years to be able to sit in the cockpit to spend a complete cycle day or night, or maybe 3-4 days in a row for the Pacific crossing, then you cope with it because you're so excited to be finally in the situation you're looking for since such a long time. But of course, if you want to spend 3-4 days, you need an autopilot. So the second airplane we're building for the flights around the world has an autopilot and has toilets. This one has no toilets and no autopilot.
It's an interesting question because it's an airplane which is sustainable in terms of energy, and we have to make now the pilot sustainable. So we know how to manage the energy of this airplane with the batteries, with how much we collect, we use, and we have to do it the same at on the human dimension. And that's true in life as well. I mean, I'm sure you guys, you are involved in the long-term project, difficult project. You can get exhausted, so you have to know how much effort you can put, how you rest, how you keep all your functions working well, and that's extremely acute when you do it 5 days, 5 nights in an airplane alone. So it's an extraordinary learning on a human point of view.
And Audrey spent already 72 hours in the flight simulator last year in order to train all this, the sleep cycles. He was monitored completely with electroencephalogram, and he had electrodes everywhere. I should do it
soon
in December. And no, that was interesting to see how in the beginning it can seem hard, and after 1 or 2 days you get into this new pace of flying the plane, of taking little power naps every couple of hours, few minutes, and I think you were sustainable at the end. You could have carried on a couple of days like this.
Well, we measured the reaction times. We measured through different games to see, in fact, if you keep the same concentration, and it was very stable over the 72 hours. And I think I could have continued, but it's how to find your own way, because I think we are all different with sleep. So my strategy works maybe well for me. Bertrand will certainly find another strategy. You may have to find another one. So it's a personal discovery.
Yeah, you don't have like business class in your plane, do you?
No, but that's the difference between the first and the second airplane, as you mentioned it. The first airplane is a very bad economy class. And for the second airplane, which is under construction now, we'd like to have at least a good business class, if not the first class.
Okay, excellent. So things like pressurization, though, for example, in the second airplane, let's shift over into the differences between the first airplane taught you a lot. Second airplane, you're now working with some proven structures, some proven flight dynamics, but you have some new challenges, like, for example, pressurization. That takes power.
We don't pressurize.
You don't pressurize. I thought that not number two.
No, we have a flight profile where the airplane climbs during the entire day and then reaches the maximum altitude just before the sun is not efficient anymore. And then we start to descend with all this altitude that is like a potential energy that has been stored. So the first 4 to 5 hours of the night are for free in terms of energy. And then we continue with the batteries until the next sunrise, and then we start again, which means that the pressurization would just be useful for probably 4 hours, which we can cope very well without pressurized cockpit. And if we
but the
pressurize
real,
to go,
the real reason is I mean, is also technical. We could pressurize, but if you pressurize as you want to exit the airplane in flight, which is always a possibility in an experimental airplane, it's very difficult to achieve. To have an exit door that you can open quickly and that allows you to go out with a parachute and with all the equipment you need, a life raft and so on. So this was too much a requirement, or too big a requirements. If we would have built a normal airplane, I think we would have had the weight budget for a pressurized cabin, but with a very, very small entry doors or doors to get out again.
Okay. So what altitudes are we talking about here? Tell us about a typical mission profile, let's say, for the United States flight and then for the world flight. Of, take off at some time, climb to which altitudes?
Every day
descent.
we climb to close to 30,000 feet.
And you're doing that just on oxygen.
Which is with oxygen, exactly. It's also the altitude at which you can cope with oxygen quite well if you're not pressurized. If you're above this altitude, at a certain stage you need pressurized oxygen, which starts to be more difficult. And of course, if you have a small difficulty with the oxygen system, the time that you have available to use a safety system or another system, or backup solutions, is more and more smaller. I think at 30,000 feet, you talk about something like half a minute, which is already short, to understand that you have a difficulty and that you have to switch to something else. So that's some kind of a safety limit that we have defined for ourselves. And every night we will go down to a low level, but this depends on meteorology, depends on the time of the year, how much are the batteries full. The goal is to be around 10,000 feet at night, but it can be lower depending on the situation.
So you descend. So you coast. You have 20,000 feet of potential energy.
Yep.
Coast down to 10,000. Air is nice and thick there. Hit the go buttons. Accelerate to a blinding. What is it? 30 knots was it? 30, blinding 35 knots, blown back in the seats by the G-forces. Power along there at that altitude until the sun is up a few degrees high enough to start fueling the batteries and climbing.
Exactly,
again.
and you start again. But you keep the same speed because you have an optimum speed, which is 25 knots. You keep this speed because you want to make sure that you have the maximum energy available.
Sure. Okay. And
I think every morning you have some kind of degree of suspense.
Yeah.
I mean, is the battery going to be have enough energy to bring you to the sunrise? And the sunrise is not when you see the sun. The sunrise is about an hour and a half later, when it's high enough to produce and to provide enough energy to the solar cells. So you
can't just like roll 90
time to
degrees
wait
to
and see exactly how it goes.
But maybe one technology you would be interested in is the way to make our oxygen system sustainable. We're working now on a little turbine turning 500,000 RPM with about 100 to 120 watts. So very small energy needs. And this pressurization against a membrane allows to extract the oxygen out of the air. So we don't need to take off with lots of oxygen in tanks which are very heavy. We just produce our own oxygen
with the solar cells
during the flight.
Nice. This is something that you've developed for the
second airplane.
With partners, typical.
Yeah. Okay.
Something which was required.
Excellent. I want one.
So we can produce our oxygen. We can recycle water. There would just be the food that would not be completely sustainable. So we have to learn
how to grow our own salads.
Yes.
Exactly.
I know someone you can talk to about that, but that's we'll take that offline. So on the mission again, the U.S. mission is sort of scaling up towards the world mission. You've got a fairly massive ground control, mission control, looking at weather, telemetry, all things. Can you tell us a bit what you're looking at, what your contingencies are? I mean, jet stream shifts. Some new country decides that it's not friendly with you anymore. What sort of factors are you working with?
Okay, for for flight permissions, it's quite easy to be Swiss and to have a Swiss registered airplane. This I tell you, neutral country, normally we have permissions from everyone.
Meteorology, of course, is a very important part of it, and we are training since 6 years now, every year. So we fly through and around the world every spring or every summer, using the meteorology of the year and using simulation tools. In fact, for the mission control center, they have a blip on the screen. If the blip comes from the airplane over the Pacific or it comes from a computer, it doesn't make a difference. So we have a simulating tool which is precise enough to make sure that we can integrate the current meteorology and have this airplane fly, for example, over the Pacific. That's what we are doing now. That's the right time to cross from China to the United States. So we are using the real meteorology to see if we can make it, if we can predict the meteorology well, and you can compare it with satellite pictures and all the information which are available. So these people make the routine of the airplane. These people will choose the time of departure and the way to proceed, and eventually an alternate if the alternate is possible and is existing, which is of course not the case over the oceans.
We talked about this before, that this is, you've often described Solar Impulse as a flying laboratory, of pushing the limits on all of these things. Can you, so on materials, on meteorology, on flight planning, on aerodynamics, are you actively talking to people about spin-offs, commercial applications? Your little oxygen thing sounds like it might be popular among us unpressurized aircraft people.
No, there are a lot of spin-offs. But what we have to understand is that on one side, it's clear that every partner working with us in his field is making spin-off. We have the best electrical engine of today, the thinner solar cells of today, the best batteries of today, the best insulation of today, and of course, all these partners providing this, testing it with us, are putting it on the market. For example, the polyurethane of very high density and lightweight that we have to protect the batteries is now going to be on the market probably for 75% of the refrigerator constructors in order to save energy in refrigerators. So this brings really to one of the goals of the project. We were saying in the beginning how important it was to motivate people to think out of the box, to be pioneers, to be innovators, but it's also very practical. It's not only philosophical. With the technologies we have on board with Solar Impulse, we can clearly say that if they were used massively everywhere in the world, we could today already, without additional innovation, divide by 2 the fuel consumption of the world and provide half of the rest with renewable sources. So we could shift from 100% or almost 100% oil world to a 25% oil world. And the technologies exist, we use them, and what we hope is that maximum number of people are really going to implement this on the market, and that it doesn't stay just in startups, in laboratories of universities or corporations who develop it, but they don't find a market for it.
Excellent. So .org Energy team, you're taking notes? Yes. Thank you, Ilya. Clearly...
No, because... So maybe just one more word for you. You know what is lacking in this world now is really the political will to go into that direction. It is still fashionable to have cars that have too much gasoline per mile, houses that are not insulated. All this is common. And here is the way that we really have to push the politicians into, in terms of encouragement, incentives, or maybe regulation, because the solutions exist, and we just need to push maybe a little bit the people to make the first step and use them. So we work also a lot with the political world with Solar Impulse. It gives us the possibility to meet a lot of politicians, heads of states, parliamentarians, and they seem to be quite motivated after they see the plane. It gives them arguments to then speak to other politicians who makes the regulations.
Mark has some questions from the Dory.
First of all, merci d'être venu ici. Thank you for having spent the time with us here. So actually, I'll start with my own question first. Since you're going to have to be flying a long time, do you have a special allowance to use drugs to keep you awake that you're not supposed to take as a pilot, or how are you planning to stay awake besides just sheer excitement? Right.
So we try, as I tried to explain at the beginning, to make this pilot sustainable, and sustainability is really a long-term perspective. So there's different methods. I do a lot of yoga and meditation, so I use that in the airplane. That's what I also use when I did my 72 hours flight in the simulator. Bertrand is using other techniques for that he'll certainly use when he does his training in this simulator this fall. So that's how, in fact, we try to cope with these questions and not using substance.
Okay. Someone's asking, the weather is a major factor in planning an around-the-world flight. Please talk about how you're planning on doing it. And I guess a follow-up question that goes together for me is, if your plane does 25 knots, with a good headwind, you'll actually be going backwards unless you're flying with a jet stream going eastbound, I'm taking it. So
we have the man who has the record of flying backwards next to me, so I think
exactly.
The world record.
No, it's true. When I came back from Morocco to Spain, I was not allowed to arrive in Madrid before midnight because of international commercial airlines. So if I was going with the wind, I would have come far too early, and then waiting there, I would have drifted to Barcelona. So the team sent me on another path to Portugal, and then on low level, then asked me to climb, and then I was headwind with a wind that was faster than me, and I drifted back to Madrid. I was facing a beautiful sunset to the west, and I was drifting to the east, so it was a perfect way to do. But it's quite strange. In the beginning, you just have to understand that to follow your line on the GPS, you have to turn left to go right, and to turn right to go left. And once you understand that, it's fine then. But you just have also to cope with the anxiety of the guys at the control center.
But is it fair to say that basically, even though you're not flying a balloon, you have 25 knots of airspeed, but really when you're at 25,000 feet, it's no airspeed at all. So are you just following the jet stream and any kind of weather patterns that will push you to where you're trying to get?
No, we try to avoid them because they may be turbulent, and we try to get the good meteorology, which is a sunny meteorology. Mm-hmm. So that's not necessarily where the jet streams are. So maybe we have them, maybe not, but it's not a goal by itself.
Okay.
And if you look at the Pacific, normally the situation is such that the wind at the upper level are west to east, favorable, but you have the trade winds which are at low altitudes, at about flight level 100, which are on the other side. So what we may do and may experience is to fly forward during the day when we climb and backwards a little bit during the night. And hopefully the day flight is going to be a little bit longer than the night flight.
And the result is that maybe when I flew around the world in my balloon, it took less time than what we were going to do with our airplane. Because with the balloon, you put yourself in the jet stream, in the core of the jet stream, right. You stay up day and night, and the average speed around the world was 60 miles per hour. Okay. With the fastest part over the Atlantic was 234 kilometers per hour. That's 131 knots, it's 160 miles per hour, 165 miles per hour. Fortunately, no speed limit.
Yeah. So the next question is also related is how long do you expect the flight around the world to take? Which is also related to, do you have a route? Do you know what you're expecting to be doing?
So, I mean, close to the balloon flight at the end. So about 20 flying days. It can be more, it can be less, it depends on the wind. But this will be spread over a certain period of time because we will be landing in the larger countries, and everywhere where we land there is a strong interest. Like now we have, when we do our stops to the United States, there is an interest for us to stay, to present, to talk, to meet, to have educational events. So the total flight may take about 2 to 3 months.
Is it possible, or how much energy does the plane use in flight? Can you convert that, or what would be the equivalent chemical energy in gallons per hour?
We are not so used with using fuel, so it's a translation which is difficult to make. But if you talk about kilowatts or horsepower, but I mean watt hour or kilowatts hour, the power we use for the night flight, it's about 8 kilowatts. So if you multiply this by 24, you get more or less the energy plus, I guess, what you lose in climbing and in going down. You get something like 240 kilowatt hours, which is the total energy we collect and we use over 24 hours with the first airplane.
When the batteries are full, we have 85 kilowatt hours at our disposal.
This 240, that's about a third for battery, a third for flying, and a third for climbing.
But it's clear that the challenge to have batteries rather than kerosene is very high. Because 1 pound of kerosene gives you the same energy than 35 pounds of batteries. So it's absolutely clear that kerosene is the most efficient way to fly. On the short term.
It's efficient, but the transformation of this type of energy into propulsion energy, of course, is much worse. So this ratio of 1 to 35 translates to something like 1 to 10 if you see how efficient electric motors are and how inefficient thermal engine is.
Before we break for the buses, any last words you'd like to share, messages of inspiration?
Well, we've talked a lot about solar impulse, because maybe solar impulse is new for you, but for us coming from Switzerland, it's great to be here. It's great to visit you. It was great to have the visit of Larry Page last Saturday and to be in the Silicon Valley, because when we speak of innovation, for you it's obvious. We even see the trees climb higher here than anywhere else. So of course everything grows here, all the ideas grow, and it's absolutely fascinating. And we're really happy to be here and to share our passion of this airplane and this philosophy of flight and energy with as many people as possible. So it was great to meet you all, and it's going to be really fun for us to present you the plane in the next 30 minutes.
And we hope we can learn also a lot about what you guys are doing, because I think it's fascinating. It's for us also extremely useful for our own goals. So if we can know more about what you do and how we can use that, that would be great as well. So thank you very much.
Yes, because we have some discussions with several of your different departments on how to maximize communication between Google, between Solar Impulse. I don't know if you heard a little bit about it, but there are different ideas going around through the Google Hangaround, Google Leaks, on your website. We'll see what comes out of it, but I'm sure something is growing fast, and I hope it's going to be ready already for the Cross America.
André, Bertrand, merci beaucoup. Thank you so much for being with us.
It was a pleasure.
And we'll gather over at the roundabout for the bus tour. Thanks again.
Thank you.